As science progresses, as does our understanding of medicine, and with that comes an ever-growing list of life-saving operations for those in need. Although this of course results in an ever-growing list of people who require it. The waiting times for certain operations are almost unanimously too long around the world, with many requiring transplants to replace organs that may be steamrolling their body into an early grave. As the internet progresses and expands the amount of information we receive daily, so does our understanding of the importance of such procedures and the dangers of waiting times. And with our often cynical views of the world around us, it seems inevitable that stories involving the darker side of this incredible feat of science and medicine would arise, teasing our insecurities and fears. None of us wants to be the victim of a robbery, but at least we can comfort ourselves with the reminder that what was taken can be replaced. It would be harder to accept if the thing that was stolen was quite literally a part of you. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is kidney theft. Most of us worldwide have heard some form of iteration of kidney theft, playing on several fears regarding strangers, operations, medication, knives and needles, and an invasion of space beyond any recognition. It's not unheard of for people to feel afraid to go under the knife during any situation, shaking the nerves of even the most stoic of us. These organs that remain inside of our bodies are hours and hours alone. We are familiar with them, yet we have never seen them as they work away to keep us ticking and alive. The idea of a knife cutting us open, hands and tools entering us, even in the cleanest of spaces, it is enough to shake us to our very core, and yet we do it. We do it as we trust our surgeons. We trust that it's what is needed to be done for the greater good of ourselves and of others. So when a story arises of somebody who had a piece of them stolen, cut open and removed from their insides against their will, it is no surprise that it would spread like wildfire, burning away at all of our anxieties. My telling of the story follows Gary, a young man on a business trip away from home, looking forward to a nightcap and a good night's rest, unaware that he would get anything but. It was already 1 a.m. when Gary perched himself at the bar of the small, posh little hotel he was staying at on his works tab. A long day of meetings and conferences about mundane steps moving forward was enough to deserve a stiff drink before bed, even if it was a nice change to get away from the office for a little while. He watched the barman pouring his drink, already somewhat tipsy from his evening buttering up potential investors in town before heading back to the hotel. He pulled off his tie from around his neck as he undid the button of his shirt, now creating a more casual look to his suited attire whilst he scanned the empty room. He let out a sigh as he contemplated going to bed and trying to sleep once again, when he noticed that he wasn't in fact alone after all. Across the room was a beautiful woman, her skin pale, her eyes large and green, her hair dark and her lips rosy red. She gently swirled her drink with her straw as the green of her eyes glinted in his direction. For a moment he was confused. He'd seen her before earlier in the night, but couldn't place where from. He looked at the floor and smiled as he noticed her eyes were now fixed on him, watching him as she drank her beverage. Just talk to her, he told himself, trying not to be intimidated by the enchanting beauty she exuded across the room. Finally, he looked up to talk, but she was gone, her drink now half empty, the straw sitting against the glass inside. He sighed to himself again, picking up his drink and taking a swig, disappointed and frustrated at himself for missing his chance, when suddenly he heard a soft woman's voice almost whisper into his ear. What's a guy like you doing in a place like this? She spoke in a strange, foreign accent that he couldn't quite place due to his own ignorance. He turned to see that she was now standing beside him at the bar, leaning casually against it as she watched him. He studied her every move that seemed so full of sexual power and lust. "And that meant to be my line?" he asked with a cheeky smile, thankful that she had broken the ice. "Did I see you earlier at the bar? I really recognize your face," he asked, too keen to start a conversation. She contemplated for a moment and replied, "No, I've been here all day. Perhaps you've seen me here." Gary knew that he had dropped off his bags and left. He also knew that he hadn't seen a single person in the hotel, as he was making jokes about the barren building he was staying in all evening. But by now, the blood was leaving his head, and his focus had quickly turned to impressing the young beauty rather than questioning her arrival. There were several warning signs that something was strange, but the distant strangeness of this woman was morphed into an alluring, sexy mystery under the guise of a beautiful face that Gary had been sucked into. He had fallen under her spell with such intensity that by the time he invited her up to his room, he genuinely believed that this was his idea, completely unaware that she had planted the seeds moments before. Finally, Gary's night of struggling sleep had changed as he sat on the edge of his old-fashioned bed with this mysterious foreign woman, who sat above him, kissing his neck and chest as she unbuttoned his shirt. It was only when he began to run his fingers up her smooth thigh that she stopped him, suddenly exclaiming that she needed a drink before pacing across the room and opening the mini-fridge by the kettle. Gary sat on the bed, impatient and frustrated yet full of excitement, still trying to get his head around his own luck as he watched her sway to the music she played whilst pouring the drinks on the desk ahead of her. She turned, continuing to dance as she swayed to the music, heading towards him with a drink in hand. The moment his fingers touched the glass, she smiled, raising her eyes to the air and exclaiming, "Cheers!" And with that, he followed suit, and they both chugged back their beverages. He held down the burn that didn't seem to bother her, too embarrassed to show his discomfort in a misplaced concept of masculinity, before composing himself, finally telling her to come here. However, she did not respond, instead continuing to swing her hips to the music as she stepped back further into the room. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched her, a slight smile on his face, when the room began to slowly spin. He shook his head, laughing under his breath with a deep exhale. "Bloody hell, that was strong," he exclaimed as the alcohol kicked in. But once again, the mysterious woman did not respond, simply swaying in the room as if enchanted by the sounds of the instruments that played through the small speaker beside her. It was only now, with the constant refusal to react, in the consistent blurriness of the bedroom as it now swayed side to side, that Gary realized something was wrong. He got to his feet and rubbed his eyes, trying to keep himself steady, laughing again under his breath, playing it down to help diminish any embarrassment, as if it was just a simple case of getting too drunk too fast. But that possibility seemed to disappear in an instant, as he looked up to see the woman was no longer dancing. She was now standing in the middle of the room, just watching him. "You're going to want to sit back down," she said calmly, coldly, and most surprisingly, in an English accent. What did you give me?" he asked, his towering body unable to match his mind's fear and panic. He began to swear and shout, swinging his arms in an attempt to defend himself. But unfortunately, all that came out were a few whimpers and a couple of slow steps forward before he finally collapsed to the ground, still whispering his angry threats until he drifted off to sleep. In the darkness, Gary heard the faint voice of the mysterious woman continue to talk in her well-mannered British accent. He didn't know if she was talking to him or on the phone. Later, he would hear the voices of men in the room. He would feel his body rise from the ground as they picked him up. He would hear the deep discussions they would have, not being able to make out any real words until eventually there was nothing but darkness. The blackness faded, and Gary's thoughts came back to him in a slow haze under the cold blue light of the bathroom. His body was numb and shivering. As he looked down to see, he was in a bathtub full of melting ice. Instantly, his body shot himself upright, freezing in pain from the sudden movement. He looked around the room, studying the dark corners, trying to peer into the warm lights of the hotel room through the gap in the door, but it seemed that he was now alone. He looked around the room, eventually noticing a phone that sat by the taps on the sink. A small note on pink paper resting beside it. He grabbed the side of the bath and pulled himself up, steadying himself to get to his feet, halted by the sudden, sharp, aching pain that ran through his body from his side like a stitch from hell. He fell back into the freezing water, looking down at his waist in confusion. And what he saw was a 6-inch incision to his side, hastily stitched back together, uncleaned and unkempt. He wanted to scream out in horror as he felt his insides twist and burn as if they had been cut at with a rough touch. He took a deep breath, trying to piece together the horrifying events that must have unfolded during his unconscious state. He tried to remember the woman's face, but he did not know her name or where she came from. He didn't know if she'd followed him from the bar to the hotel or if she was staying in this very building. She very well could be on the floor below watching television right now. He pushed himself over the edge of the bath, once again growling in pain as his cold skin pulled against the porcelain edges, pulling his wound apart until he slammed against the floor below. He lay there for a moment, pulling himself closer to the sink, reaching up to grab the phone that sat upon it, unsure if the shaking was due to fear or the ice that had been both caressing and biting at his body. He pulled the phone, causing it to fall hard, nearly hitting him in the face. The pink slip slowly fell with it, landing by his arm as he dialed the reception on the bottom floor. He could feel and hear his teeth chattering, his eyes filling with tears as he listened to the ringing of the phone to the front desk. And whilst he waited, he looked down at the paper by his arm, raising it in front of him to get a clear look of it in the dim light. In elegant handwriting, she had left him a note, simply saying, "Sorry, you're going to want to call for help. Kiss." Above many urban legends, this story is one of the most widely believed, spread across the world through film, television, and the World Wide Web. But it's still, in comparison to many other legends we tell, only an infant, peering its blood-soaked head amongst the zeitgeist in the early 90s. The story itself is so feasible and straightforward in its narrative that it's easy to see why it's so believed by so many. As horrific and terrible as the event is, and as much as we would like to avoid its occurrence, it would still be considered average amongst the dark stories that emerge from the black market or the war crimes recorded over time, let alone all the true crime murders that we see through documentaries over the years. It's so young that one of the earliest accounts of it is an appearance in a television show, Law and Order, that aired in April 1991. The episode, titled Sonata for Solo Organ, followed the story of a stolen kidney. However, as was the case of many episodes of Law & Order, they prided themselves in their crimes being based on real-life events. It wasn't until 1997 that the story would explode around North America, changing from a forgotten episode amongst hundreds of hour-long crimes that appeared on a popular show, and morphing to become the urban legend it is today. Once again, keeping up with its contemporary design, it was an email that spread the story of a stolen kidney like an untreated infection across the internet. In an early form of chainmail, the subject header warned, "Travelers beware," with the contents explaining that a highly organized gang were operating in major US cities, drugging business travelers and stealing their kidneys to sell on the black market. To add authenticity to this email, several testimonials from others claiming the event had also occurred near them were placed at the bottom of the email. It also requested that the recipient pass it on to warn their friends and colleagues as they traveled around the country for work. In a time before a greater understanding of spam, where the cast members of Friends were hired to shoot how-to videos to help people get to grips with their computers, this worked as a treat, and the story continued to duplicate as it jumped from office to office. From here, as expected when using the new internet technology, the story traveled through every string of its webbing, crawling overseas to the United Kingdom and mainland Europe before continuing the trail to the Eastern Hemisphere. This story was widely believed as it moved from our screens to the water coolers and bars. It was eventually discussed in magazines and newspapers, spreading panic and fear amongst the general public. This became so strong and problematic for officials that finally, the National Kidney Foundation put out a plea for any individual who had their kidney illegally removed to step forward and contact them in an effort to dispel the belief. To this day, not a single legitimate case has ever come to fruition. Regardless, the story lives on, evolving and changing to fit the world as urban legends often do. Fear is an emotion that evokes a strong reaction. Mix this with morbid curiosity, and you have a tale that will continue to live on for years to come. The dark mystery causes us to lean over the campfire as the stories are told, no matter how fictional. But although the story itself is false, that doesn't mean that is where the narrative of organs being sold on the black market ends. If you're still with me, then I know you share the same passion for folklore and urban legends that drives this show. But to keep bringing you these stories, I need your help. Every season comes to life with the incredible support of listeners like you on Patreon. For just £3 a month, less than the price of a small coffee, you can help ensure that this show continues to thrive, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content available. But that's not all. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks like access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, where we dive into lesser-known but equally captivating tales like the Hodag, Black-Eyed Children, the Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll gain instant access to our entire library of bonus content the moment you join, with new chapters coming each season. You'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at how the show is made, discounts on merchandise, and an invitation to our private group chat, where you can connect with me directly and share your love for urban legends with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Plus, as a special treat, I randomly select patrons to feature in upcoming stories, so you might find yourself becoming part of the very legends we explore. Supporting us on Patreon isn't just about subscribing. It's about joining a team dedicated to preserving and expanding on our collection of folklore. Your contribution directly fuels the research, production, and growth of the show, helping us continue this incredible journey together. So, if you're ready to take the next step and become an integral part of the Urban Legends community, head over to our Patreon page via the link in our show notes and choose the paid subscription. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, where we can keep these tales alive. And now, back to the legend. It was in December of 1989 that Reuters reported on a 34-year-old Turkish man, Ahmet Koch. It would tell the story of a man who had been lured to Great Britain with the promise of a cleaning job so he could work hard and make money. Turkish businessmen had offered him this grand opportunity for a new life, although they had also made it clear that he would need a medical check to be approved. He arrived at the hospital, noticing that it seemed more like a hotel, and allowed them to take a blood sample. To his horror, he would soon learn that this was, in fact, quite the opposite, as instead of taking something, he was being injected with an anesthetic, causing him to lose consciousness. It wasn't until 3 days later that he would finally be told that he had, in fact, had a kidney removed, and it had already been transplanted into another patient. Although he was told that for his troubles, he would receive payment. £2,650 to be exact. And although this seems like a similar account of kidney theft at first glance, it would soon reveal itself to not be that simple. Ahmet had gone to Turkish authorities to report the illegal organ brokers, resulting in a 2-year sentence for one of the businessmen, who turned out to actually be brothers. Although, during this investigation, it also came to light that the kidney was not taken by Ahmet without his permission, and that he was fully aware of what was going to happen. Due to this, Ahmet received a 2-year suspended sentence for his role in the illegal trade. When the British press caught wind of this fascinating story, Ahmet's tale exploded due to its juicy narrative and twisted reveals. The papers had learnt about this after Ahmet was called upon by a General Medical Council's disciplinary hearing, which led to one final twist in this dark story. They were shocked and amazed to find an advertisement in a now defunct Turkish newspaper. In this ad, the writer offered to sell one of their kidneys for a reasonable fee. An ad, as it turned out, that was placed there by Ahmet himself. It seemed the truth, although dark, was just not as seductive enough to live on its own 2 feet, and so, instead, the world unconsciously decided to brush that under the rug and ran with the far juicier story of a man who had a kidney stolen against their will. This was likely the inspiration for that early episode of Law & Order. The story of Ahmet was long forgotten by 1997 when the new email was running wild across the web. The New Orleans Police Department received more than 100 calls from concerned citizens since New Orleans was one of the listed cities this apparently was taking place. This got so out of hand that the police department eventually published a webpage dedicated to this rumor, denying its existence in reality. Around the same time, elsewhere in the world, India's parliament passed a bill limiting organ donations to close relatives and enforcing prison terms for up to 7 years for selling an organ in 1995. Even so, it has been reported that in several states where the law had not yet been ratified by state legislators, men continued to find poor people needing financial benefits and bought the kidney for what works out as $1,000. This may not seem much to us, but that was more than a year's salary for a rural Indian labourer, especially one already financially struggling. And if that still seems too low to give up a part of your body, then the fact that those who took the kidney would have been paid between $6,000 and $10,000 by the recipient of the organ can only be salt in the wound. And although outlawed and therefore difficult to confirm, sources suggest that selling your own organs is still going on in many places, with prison sentences remaining reasonably low due to the voluntary nature of the procedure. In May of 1998, 3 surgeons and 7 others at the Noida Medicare Center in Uttar Pradesh, India, were charged for approaching various unemployed, struggling men with the promise of jobs and connections to a world of possibility. They were advised that a medical examination was required. They would use the results to imply that a small operation was needed to fix a problem. And during these operations, and unknown to the victim, one of their kidneys would be removed for resale. Once this was complete, there would be no job offer. It was back in 2013 where a Costa Rican couple were detained in Israel due to the illegal activities they were there to perform. It seems as though an Israeli company had pledged to pay $20,000 to the couple for the purchase of the woman's left kidney, which could then be sold for up to $150,000 on the black market. This was a plan coordinated by a Costa Rican doctor who was, in fact, imprisoned for human trafficking with the intent of organ harvesting. This case was but one piece of a much larger organ trafficking business founded a few years prior, disguised as transplant tourism with connections to Costa Rica, Israel, and several Eastern European countries. In 2014, Carlos Castellanos Becerra, the public safety secretary of Michoacán, Mexico, claimed that the Knights of Templar cartel that haunted the area had expanded from drug trafficking and extortion. Now, it was claimed that the members of the cartel had been arrested due to years of kidnapping. Minors would be the main target of those on the hunt for victims, and once caught, they would be operated on, having their organs removed and sold on the black market. This was reported briefly during this time, although where this investigation led is hard to decipher, and any evidence to back up these claims is relatively inconclusive. Stories connected to these gruesome tales continue to this day, with one account being as recent as 2023. That May, Ike Ekwamadu, Beatrice Ekwamadu, and Dr. Obina Obata were imprisoned for 9 years and 8 months, 4 years and 6 months, and 10 years respectively at the Old Bailey in England, charged with conspiring to arrange the travel of an individual with the sole purpose of harvesting his organs. You see, Ike and Beatrice had a daughter who suffered from deteriorating kidneys and required regular dialysis. Being on a waiting list is a long-winded, stress-inducing process, and so, in a scheme to avoid this, the couple worked alongside Dr. Obita to recruit a man from Lagos, Nigeria, with the promise of making him some much-needed money. In return for his kidney, the couple had promised the man between £2,400 and £7,000, alongside a promise of a job within the United Kingdom. The man travelled to England to join the trio, where they would go on to have a kidney screening at the Royal Free Hospital in London with a consultant at hand. However, this consultant had become immediately suspicious about the circumstances of the transplant, blocking it from going any further. Chief Crown Prosecutor Joanne Jakaimek is quoted as saying, "This was a horrific plot to exploit a vulnerable victim by trafficking him to the UK for the purpose of transplanting his kidney." When we think of human trafficking, we often think of the sex trade and slave ownership. However, in recent years, efforts have been made to take the act of human trafficking for the purpose of organ harvesting as seriously. Known as organ trafficking or trafficking in persons for organ removal, the criminal act is considered a worldwide issue, with some reporting that it is now a $1.7 billion industry. According to Global Observation on Donation and Transplantation, the current global need for organs is far greater than the supply, with just over 140,000 transplants performed annually worldwide, a mere 10% of the global need. With this in mind, I can empathize with those who have the financial means to do so to ensure the safety and longevity of those they love and care for. By going through the black market, they avoid waiting times and the potential loss of life. But the cost is undoubtedly too high for such an act to be considered moral. Many of us say we would do anything to save the lives of those we loved. And there are some out there who even defend the actions of organ trafficking, pointing out that the trafficked are making a profit out of the act. This makes the situation a transaction made of free will. However, according to many authorities around the world, if a donor is being coerced and their vulnerability exploited, it cannot be considered valid consent. Victims of organ harvesting are often refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers, often targeted due to their desperation to do anything that may help them gain a better life for themselves and their loved ones. There have been claims made that at times their lack of education is used against them, being convinced that their kidney would, in fact, grow back, or that they actually have 3 kidneys. On other occasions, the payment they are expecting for their organ never comes, leaving them with no way of receiving it and no authority they can turn to. In recent years, we have seen a boom in medical tourism, whether it be for hair transplants, veneers, or plastic surgery. But there is also a dark underbelly to this, sneaking in and out of the back door of what the general public see. And this is transplant tourism. As you may have already concluded, this is the act of traveling to a country with fewer regulations in order to receive an illegal transplant. And it's these acts that make the work of human traffickers possible, allowing them to build criminal networks with a string of corrupt medical professionals and law enforcement officers. These stories are compelling and horrifying in equal measure and venture eerily close to the tales of kidney theft as the urban legend tells it. However, no matter how immoral, illegal, and disgraceful they may be deemed to be, they are not quite the actions of taking somebody's organs with force against their will. That said, there have been reports of actions that, if true, are eerily similar to the urban legends we hear. To find out more about this complicated, politically charged story, we have to venture around the world to the nation of China. Falun Gong is a Chinese Qigong discipline that involves meditation and philosophy stemming from Buddhist traditions. This rose in popularity through the 90s, and by 1998, Chinese government sources estimated that it was practiced by up to 70 million citizens. This wasn't well received by the Communist Party, as their leader, Jiang Zemin, issued a nationwide campaign to eradicate the group under the justification that Falun Gong was a potential threat to their ideology and authority. It has been documented that since this initiative began in 1999, Falun Gong practitioners have been subject to systematic torture, forced labor, psychiatric abuse, mass imprisonment, and even organ harvesting. The American writer, researcher, and author by the name of Ethan Gutmann initiated his own investigation into the reported crimes of the Chinese government back in 2006. Over several years, he conducted interviews with over 100 refugees from China's prison system, alongside interviews with medical professionals and law enforcement personnel. This investigation would lead to the arrival of Enver Tohti, an exiled pro-Uyghur independence activist. He would boldly claim that organ pillaging could be traced as far back as the year 1990, and that he himself was, in fact, the first to perform a live organ transplant on an Uyghur Muslim prisoner in 1995. He would explain that he would be taken to a room near the execution grounds to remove the liver and kidneys of an executed prisoner. It was only once he had begun the operation that he realized that, although shot, this patient's heart was still beating as he removed both the kidneys and liver. Gutmann would go on to understand that over time, as the clampdown on Falun Gong practitioners grew, they eventually surpassed the Uyghur as the forced organ volunteers in their prison system, estimating that around 65,000 Falun Gong practitioners had been killed for their organs between the years of 2000 and 2008, whilst also providing testimony of his conclusions before US Congress and European Parliament. In 2014, he published the investigation titled The Slaughter, Mass Killings, Organ Harvesting, and China's Secret Solution to its Dissident Problem. During this time, the Kilgore-Mattas report was under construction, now known by many as the go-to investigation to fully understand what was going on. The report was conducted by Canadian MP David Kilgour and human rights lawyer David Matas, at the request of the Coalition to Investigation of Falun Gong, abbreviated as CIPFG. The Kilgore-Matas report claims that more organ donations are given than official donors in China. The report alludes to the suspicion that prisoners of conscience are donating their organs against their will. This led the US House of Representatives and the European Parliament to pass resolutions condemning the practice. The allegations themselves have been strongly supported by a report as recent as 2017. This report was an update on two separate works of investigative journalism. The first was the publication by Ethan Gutman, and the second was Bloody Harvest, The Killing of Falun Gong for Their Organs, written by David Matas and David Kilgore. An independent tribunal looking into the accusations, known simply as the China Tribunal, was officially initiated in 2018. Based in the City of London, the tribunal consisted of 7 members and did not have any legal authority, although it was still taken seriously by those around them. They had asked the Chinese government to assist them, but the government refused to participate. This tribunal heard an array of evidence over 6 months, including analysis of Chinese translated data and testimonies from ex-prisoners, doctors, and human rights workers. Alongside this were covertly recorded phone calls with transplant surgeons through undercover footage. This was all reviewed with great intensity as the tribunal tried to find the truth behind these bold accusations and claims. And in June 2019, the tribunal published its final judgment. It was a unanimous decision that crimes against humanity had, in fact, been committed, adding, "The tribunal's members are certain, unanimously, and sure beyond a reasonable doubt, that in China, forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience have been practiced for a substantial period involving a very substantial number of victims." As a result of this report, and an admission from China that they had harvested organs in the past, several prominent journals are now pushing for more robust controls to ensure that papers produced on organ transplantation only use those organs that are voluntarily obtained. Although to counteract this dark accusation is a report by the Washington Post in 2017 that contradicted the allegations that China continues to conduct 60,000 to 100,000 organ transplants a year in secret. Data compiled by the American company Quintiles IMS showed that China's requirements for immunosuppressant drugs, which are necessary to prevent patients from rejecting transplants, were near enough entirely in line with the number of transplants that China publicly claimed to have performed. Critics pushed back against this, though, claiming that China's immunosuppressant data wouldn't include foreign transplant tourists. That said, the head of the World Health Organization's transplantation program, Jose Nunez, stated that the number of foreign travelers to China for transplants was relatively low compared to countries such as India, Pakistan, and even the USA. It seems that much of the evidence points towards the cases of organ harvesting in China's prison systems being an accurate account of horrifying human rights violations, although much of this is circumstantial due to the country's strict rules. It is also worth mentioning that the Chinese government have repeatedly denied that Falun Gong practitioners have been killed for their organs. Now, whether you believe them or not is another story, and with just how recent the newest reports are, it seems that this investigation is far from over. When a tale is told in all 4 corners of the world, small changes and embellishments create different versions, with only the core narrative staying true. In early incantations of the story, friends would return to their hotel room to find a friend on either a blood-soaked bed, on the floor, or propped up against the building outside. In this version of the story, it is only when they arrive at the hospital that the dark truth emerges that they have now had an organ removed. The email version of the story that expanded the global narrative often told of a businessman being bought drinks by a stranger at a bar, only to wake up in a bathtub covered in ice with a phone next to them with a message to call the police. Later, they would learn that their kidney was removed by criminals who intended to now sell them on the black market. Over time, the friend's arrival to find the blood-soaked victim had been removed, replaced with a bathtub of ice and an ominous note. Perhaps this version of the tale survived due to the eerie idea of waking up, feeling completely violated, confused, and in a state of panic, only to find that you are also entirely alone. The note sets a strange level of care, as if being handed a slight bit of kindness, only emphasizing how impersonal this attack was. In many ways, this does not make it more comforting. It does the opposite, reminding the victim that they were, in fact, nothing but a hunted animal that was now let free once they had got what it was that they required. In America, the story evolved once again, finding itself embedded in the city of Las Vegas. Here, the story followed a man who was more often than not married, who had taken a woman to his hotel room to fulfill his needs whilst away from home. This version of the tale twists it again, turning it into a warning story about who we invite into our lives and personal space. Not to mention the got what you deserved aspect that often appears in urban legends. If he had been loyal to his wife and family, he would have gone home happily the next day, fully intact. Before long, the story expanded across the USA again, spreading around the world. Now the story was more sympathetic, where the wary businessman traveler went back to his hotel for a drink after a hard day's work, only to have been slipped a drug by someone nearby. This being an innocent wary traveler turns this victim into any of us, representing how quickly our worlds can change and how we may be being hunted without ever knowing it. Perhaps something similar had happened to us before, where we were being watched and targeted, only to have gotten away with it with a simple change of actions. And maybe, just maybe, next time, we'll not be so lucky.
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images, and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.